With the fiscal cliff crisis settled at the last possible moment, what are the chances that Congress can actually reach a deal on spending cuts in a timely manner? Representative Jack Kingston is a Republican from Georgia and also a member of the Appropriations Committee. Representative Maxine Waters is a Democrat from California. She will be ranking member of the Financial Services Committee. And welcome to both of you, representatives. I'd really like to thank you for joining us. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, can we start with you and just ask you, at this point, we've been trying to figure out who won this battle, who lost. With the looming debt ceiling crisis that's still out there, did anyone win?
Absolutely. Our middle-class American taxpayers won. With this agreement that we made last evening in the bill that the president has signed, our middle-income taxpayers in America will not have a tax increase. As a matter of fact, they'll have a permanent tax break. And the billionaires and millionaires of this country are going to have to pay their fair share. We did increase their tax rate. And so if anybody won, it was middle-class people who work every day, raising their families, sending their kids to school, and just trying to have a decent quality of life. They absolutely won last evening.
Congressman Kingston, you hear a plea like that, and it makes people wonder, why'd you vote no? What was your thought process, and what do you want to see happen next?
Well, remember, this was a two-step, allegedly a balanced approach that was supposed to have revenue increases and deficit reduction, and yet CBO has said for every $10 in revenue increase, there has only been $1 in revenue or deficit reduction. And so what we really did is punt for 2 months the sequestration. We're going to have another huge meltdown, another round of Washington hysteria surrounding the fiscal cliff. And to me, I don't think this is a good way to run the government, to run the country, or run the economy. When we're fragile enough, we should have done everything at once. We should have had the Senate act on our budget back in the spring, or at least H.R. 8 back in August when the House passed it. And we should approach this in, I'd say, a sane, methodical, thoughtful manner, and not wait for 2 months to reenact this whole play all over again.
Congressman Waters, Tyler Matheson here. Welcome back. When you were with us about a week ago, we were talking about what specific changes to Medicare, if any, you could embrace by way of restraining the growth of spending there. And I'm not sure in the heat of the discussion over taxes and so forth that we got the answer. And I'm wondering, I just want to repose the question. Do you acknowledge that we have to restrain the growth of spending in some of our entitlement programs? And if you do acknowledge that, how would you do it?
Let me just say what I think we really do have to acknowledge. We have to acknowledge that there are the very rich and the very privileged in this country who do not pay their fair share of taxes, and they take advantage of every loophole, every deduction. And when we talk about, can we have the revenue to take care of the least of these, we have to look at what we can do. For example, what about carried interest? What about transitional taxes? What about oil subsidies? What about looking in those areas? The defense budget. Let us look where we can credibly get the kind of revenue to do what Americans expect us to do for a decent quality of life. Before we talk about going to the least of these to bear this burden, let's talk about those who are getting away with corporate welfare.
So do I take your answer then to mean that you do not acknowledge that the growth of entitlement spending has anything really to do with the debt situation we find ourselves in? And then a second follow-up, if I might, Congressman, would you just implicitly from what you just said, would you favor, for example, raising the contribution that high-income seniors pay for their Medicare coverage? High-income folks like me, and I'm going to be 65 in 7 years, shouldn't I pay more for the same benefit that someone who is less able to pay gets?
What I am saying to you is, before we look at Medicare, before we look at Social Security, before we look at Medicaid, of course we should always do whatever we can do to get rid of fraud and abuse and all of that. But before we talk about eliminating any of the coverage, and before we talk about separating those who can afford to pay a little more from those who can't pay much, let's look in areas where we have the very rich and the very privileged getting away with not bearing the burden of their responsibilities in this country. That's what I'm saying.
Congressman Kingston, you two are standing next to each other, you and Congresswoman Waters, but it sounds like you are still worlds apart. Are we going to take this right up to the brink again when we get into the debt ceiling and to the sequestration deal that's been moved down the road?
You know, I hope we don't. And one of the things that Maxine and I know agree on is that this needs to be a decentralized process where it goes through her committee, it goes through my committee, and each one of us has ideas that we can put on the table to avoid this. One of our great complaints, I think, in both parties is this kind of boiled down to a high-level discussion between Speaker Boehner and the President, and we feel that you got 435 members of the House, 100 members of the Senate. If each of us working through regular order in our subcommittees come up with ideas, I think we can fashion a better agreement in a much better process. And I think on the very sensitive things such as Medicare, you could do that through the proper subcommittees, and there are about 5 of jurisdiction, and each one of us could come up with ideas like tort reform or end of life, living will type arrangements, maybe some sort of deductible if you don't have one. There could be some things that I think would drive the discussion that could be very, very productive, that would avoid this kind of fiasco and high-level drama that we've had in the last couple of weeks.
I absolutely agree with Jack. I want the regular order of business. I don't support these super committees. I don't support 2 or 3 people in the back room making a deal. I don't support 2 or 3 people slipping in things that we don't know about.
That requires time to go through those formal processes. So are you both committing to right now saying that yes, you will begin this process now? We've got 2 months.
Well, we kicked the can down the road for 2 months, and I thought that was absolutely necessary. Oh, absolutely. I do think that we should have the regular order of business and do the business with, you know, transparency so that the people of this country can see and understand what we're saying, who's saying what. I agree with Jack on that.
All right, folks. I'm sorry to have to interrupt you. We have to move, but I'm sure we'll have you back. We appreciate your spirited points of view, and thank you, and Happy New Year to both of you.